Good evening.
Hey Harold, how are you?
I'm good.
Good. Shem. Perfect.
Yes. Uh,
Hi, Harold.
hi, Mario.
We're starting number 18.
Yep. Very exciting.
Oh, yeah. I actually like this.
What was that?
I like this here.
Oh, yeah, it's very good. It's the way it's put together is very logical. It's like, makes it very easy.
So there were many people at the wedding.
Yeah, a lot of kids. Oh my God, from his yeshiva, and very nice boys. But whoo, Lebedik, wow! I get out of the way. I was gonna get run over. It was fun. Very good. Very good food. It's a place called Marina del Rey. It's in the Bronx.
Yeah, I
Very,
saw the invitation.
yeah,
Yeah.
Yes,
very Heimish food. It was
yes.
very good. Very good food.
Very good.
Yeah. It started late and we left at 11. It was not even close to being finished. Who knows? Maybe they're still there. Who knows?
By the way, I was reading something. I don't know if it was in that book, The Money People, The Money King, something about
Yeah.
about Marion, Pennsylvania.
Oh, there's a city there. Yeah, near Philadelphia.
That's where you are, no? From?
No, I'm from the other side of the state, near Ohio.
I
Yeah,
thought it was.
Lower Marion is next to Philadelphia.
Ah,
Yeah,
and which
I'm
the
from the other side.
what's the name of the town you were?
Sharon.
Oh,
There's a
Sharon,
there's a
Sharon.
Sharon, Massachusetts, which has a good good sized Jewish population. But where I'm from, there's hardly anybody left anymore.
Okay. I don't know why I.
Because the boy Simcha's son goes to yeshiva right around there, right outside of Philadelphia.
Oh,
Yeah. So his Rosh Yeshiva came with very Lebedik. He was doing a dance with the boys. I'm telling you, the guy was. I had to get out of the way. I thought he was going to run me over. Wow, fun.
Jorge.
Oh,
Good
let's see.
evening.
Good evening. Hi, Jorge.
Hi.
Hello, good evening, everybody.
Hello.
Good evening. Good evening.
Good evening.
So I do have volume 18s for those who need it.
Time was asking.
Who's this?
I answered you have it.
Yes, I do. I sent them.
Okay.
So where are we holding today?
Starting
Page
volume 18.
Huh?
In
Okay. Got it. Thank you.
23.
let's see if Fine sent me a. Who's this? 1 second. What time is this? I dealt with that already.
All right.
I hope everybody had a nice Purim.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
It's
We
amazing.
did.
We have finished 17 volumes of Tzurba M'Rabanan.
I think it's 18.
This is 18.
Yeah, no. We had one for COVID.
But
Yeah.
yes, that's correct. That's correct. It's about there are 5,000, I mean, you're talking about,
Maria's a-
5,000 pages.
Mario's a Baal Cheshbon, so it's really number 19. I mean, like,
But it's just okay, page 23. We're gonna really now go deeply into Bishul. In the last year, in the previous volume, we studied some of the fundamental principles of Malach of Bishul, cooking. And in this year, we'll discuss additional important principles related to how Bishul applies even to uncooked food placed in utensils that are not on the fire. Of course, this is the issue of how do we prepare our coffee and tea Shabbos morning. This will come into this issue. We will first need to define several distinct halachic terms that will be used frequently over the course of this year and the next. Kli Rishon is a vessel with food that was cooked on the fire. So if you have a pot, certainly if you have a pot on the fire with food in it, that's a Kli Rishon. If you take that pot that was on the fire with food in it, that's still a Kli Rishon. Okay, so that's some pot on the fire is a Kli Rishon, but even when you take that pot off the fire, that food is in a Kli Rishon. Then you have Irui Kli Rishon, pouring the hot contents of a Kli Rishon onto other food. So if you take a ladle, well, forget about the ladle for a minute. Let's say you take let's say there was hot water in that pot, the Kli Rishon, and you have, let's say, in a bowl, dry mandlin. Now you pour that soup, that's Irui Kli Rishon. Okay, that's pouring a liquid from a Kli Rishon onto that. So the question will be, does that liquid have the power to cook that uncooked, whatever that you're pouring it on? Then there's a Kli Sheni, which is a vessel into which the hot contents of a Kli Rishon are moved. That means we talked about you have a food in a Kli that's on the fire, now you took it off the fire, and then you move some of that food into another Kli. Let's say your plate. So that's a Kli Rishon. Excuse me. That's a Kli Sheni. That's a Kli Sheni. You've moved it from the Kli Rishon to the Kli Sheni. Now, if you did another if you poured, Iru Kli Sheni is pouring the contents of a Kli Sheni onto other food. And Kli Shlishi is a vessel into which the contents of a Kli Sheni are moved. So from a Kli Rishon to a Kli Sheni, then if you move it to another dish, it's a Kli Shlishi. So let us begin with the subject of Bishul in a Kli Rishon. We know that cooking raw food on the fire or in an oven constitutes Bishul. Does the same hold true for placing raw food in a hot Kli Rishon, such as a pot of soup that was already removed from the fire? Remember, we already said that even though you've moved the pot off the fire, it's still called a Kli Rishon. Now, what if you throw something in and there's hot soup in there and it's sitting on the counter? And now I want to put a raw knadle, I want to dump it in there. It would seem that the answer is yes, that it is cooking and you cannot do it. As the Mishnah Masechta Shabbos states, that one may not add uncooked spices to a pot that has been removed from the fire. But it is permitted to add spices to food in a serving dish, i.e., we've moved it to a Kli Sheni. So, l'chora, it's going to be from the Mishnah that if you add spices to your food on your plate, which is a Kli Sheni, you're not cooking those uncooked spices.
if you have a pot of soup and you put some pepper in or salt, that's not considered cooking. Is that considered cooking?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. So we're talking about Friday night. It's already Shabbos. So if you've taken that, but let's say the soup is still in that Kli Rishon, Walter, you can't add salt or pepper to that. Now, if you
add it in your plate,
if you've moved it to the
Kli Sheni.
You've moved it to the Kli Sheni, so far it seems from the Mishnah that adding the spices will not be a problem. but it's not going to be so simple because there may be gzeros that maybe you need a kli shlishi. We'll see. Let's go through it step by step.
The question,
Right now, it's not a problem adding the spices from the Mishnah into a kli sheni. And you
question is
move
salt.
the soup into your soup bowl. That's a
Eh,
kli sheni.
I
And now you have salt and pepper to it. That's not a problem.
I understand, but the question is salt considered a spice or is salt considered something different? I'm just asking. It's just a question. In other words,
Remember, salt does get cooked. It gets dissolved. And pepper gets cooked. Other spices gets cooked. You know, they're raw. They're in the state of they're in their natural state as raw.
but they're processed. It's a processed thing. It's not like a spice which is not processed. Salt is processed.
Not cooked. It's not heated. It's not. I don't think you can use ein bishul achar bishul. I don't think salt.
I understand.
Salt is mined.
Yeah. So it's not. I get it.
Okay, let's see. We will discuss all this. Let's learn the Mishnah in Masechta Shabbos. Ha'ilfis ve'akedera. You have a frying pan or a pot. She'aviran merotchim. And you moved it off the fire. So it's not on the fire. Certainly if it's on the fire, it's a problem. But even if it's not on the fire, it's still a kli rishon. Lo yitein l'tochan tavlin. You may not put spices in there. Aval notenu l'tocha ka'ara. But you can put the soup or the stew, whatever was in the kli rishon, into a kli sheni, or l'tocha tamkli. A large bowl. Okay. The Gemara Shabbos 42 explains that it is forbidden to add spices to a pot of hot food that was on the fire, because that pot is classified as a kli rishon. Even when the pot is no longer sitting on the fire, it is still capable of cooking the spices that are placed inside it. Even now, since it and its contents remain hot from the fire. By contrast, a dish into which the hot food from a kli rishon is poured, such as into a bowl or tureen, is a kli sheni, which was not heated by the fire. It's not going to be heated by the hot food that goes into it, but it doesn't have the same characteristics. Therefore, spices or other raw food placed in the hot food in a kli sheni would not become cooked. So that's an important principle. What exactly is the distinction between a kli rishon and a kli sheni? The Yerushalmi offers two approaches. According to Rabbi Yossi, the hotter kli rishon is more capable of cooking than the kli sheni, which is assumed to be cooler, since it was never on the fire. Right? The pot that was on the fire has received direct heat from the flame. So there's still heat that is retained in the walls of that kli and has the ability to keep adding heat. Now remember, a bowl that you took from your pantry and now you're putting hot food in it, yes, that plate is cold. It doesn't add heat to the food. In fact, the temperature of the food is not going to go down once it's put in that kli. Now, Rav Yonah and his son Rav Mana argue that Chazal distinguish between these kinds of utensils as a rule, even if a kli sheni is sometimes just as hot as a kli rishon. Meaning, if let's say you had a temperature gauge and you were measuring the temperature of a kli sheni, of a kli rishon, you've taken it off the fire, and now you pour some food into a kli sheni and you measure the temperature. It's exactly the same. Still, the Gemara is going to say that it's different. While according to Rabbi Yossi, it would not be different. The heat is what's doing it. Let's see the Yerushalmi. Ma ben kli rishon, ma ben kli sheni. On Rabbi Yossi b'Rav Bun, kana yad soletis, the kana yad soletis. So Rabbi Yossi is learning has to do with heat. If it's 114 degrees yad soletis bo, it's a kli rishon. If the kli sheni is also yad soletis bo, it would not be a kli sheni. We have a status of a kli rishon, even though it's the secondary vessel. But Rav Yoina, no, kan v'kan in a yad soletis. It's not above. It's not a matter of yad soletis. Ela asu harchakal kli rishon, v'lo asu harchakal kli sheni. It's a gzeira that even if it's below 114, we don't want you to put anything in the kli rishon as a gzeira, because you might put it into the kli when it's on the fire. So you stay away from a kli rishon no matter what the temperature is. But a kli sheni doesn't have that problem. Amar Mana hahan pincha de urza mesai leila abba. A pot of rice agrees with Rav Mana's father. Hahan pincha agrees to mesai leila abba. Da'at mibnei leimin atar la'atar va'ad kidunu roteach. Because some cooked foods are retaining their heat even in a cliche. Now, the Ramban infers from the explanation of Rabbi Yonah, who sees Kli Rishon and Kli Sheni as having similar levels of heat, that adding uncooked food to a Kli Rishon is forbidden only midrabanan, right? It was a gzeira. But in actuality, even a Kli Rishon, after it has been removed from the fire, really doesn't have the power to do Bishul. Just like a Kli Sheni doesn't have the power to do Bishul. If Yitzchak Bar Gufna boy, the Kli Rishon Nami, Rav Yitzchak asked in the Yerushalmi, you remove the pot from the fire, the masnisim over v'aser came that if you went ahead and did it, chayivu, mishum mevashal alone. Are you cooking or not? Poshetlei, shu potter of a it's rabbinic. You're not chayiv a korban chatas. You're potter from chatas, but you're not allowed to do it. She'ein bishul borer, ela ba'or. We only know for sure cooking is occurring when it's on the fire. Mahalach tachta, when there's fire underneath it, cooking it. But when you take the pot off the flame, you can't really say that Bishul is going on. That's why they asked the question in Yerushalmi. What's really the difference with the two kelim? And Rabbi Yonah explained, they're both not at the level of heat that you need cooking. But they made a gzeira. They say, stay away from a kli rishon, don't put anything in a kli rishon, no matter what. But the law are so hard with kli sheni. But they didn't make such a gzeira, no matter what the temperature was in a kli sheni. That this whole question of putting spices, etc., into these dishes, it's not midaraisa, it's only midrabanan. Anyways. We're on page 24, volume 18. Chaim, I have volume 18s, and anybody else who needs them. Oh, Chaim gave it, got it? Here now?
Yeah.
You just gave it to him? Okay, very good. Shkoyim.
I paid for it.
And he
Chaim,
gave
thank
him
you.
change back.
What page you on?
24.
Thank you.
Kli rishon, kli sheni. By contrast, the Rashba writes that cooking in a kli rishon is no different from cooking using other derivatives of fire, which is forbidden midrabanan. It's like a tolda of eish. Mikomaka mistavra de'ena ashel levashel keneged madura. If you have uncooked cold food and you put it next to a fire or into a kli rishon, of course it can be mizbashel. But let's say you took a kli off of the fire and you put a uncooked food in it, or keneged madura, or near a fire. So you can't cook uncooked cold food either near the fire or in a kli rishon. But cold food that was already cooked, right? Because of our issue of bishul achar bishul. You can put it in a kli rishon or opposite the fire. V'tevelecha, da'ataninan, kol sheba b'chaim l'fnei Shabbos. That which you can, let's say, cook food that was already cooked. Shornus of a chaim Shabbos klemer afilu b'kli rishon afagav the toldas or ka'or. Even though sort of a derivative tolda is like fire itself, the Rashba is basically saying that if you cook uncooked food into a kli rishon, not that it was already cooked, but uncooked food, it's going to be the same as cooking it on fire. According to both approaches, it is prohibited to place uncooked food in a hot kli rishon. And the Shulchan Aruch codifies this, ruling that a kli rishon is capable of cooking. provided the temperature is at least Yad Soletis Bo. We said 114. Says the Shulchan Aruch, Orach Chaim Shin Yud Ches, Kli Rishon, Perish HaKli Shemishtamish Bo La'esh, the Kli that was on the fire, but doesn't necessarily have to be on the fire now. Afilu La'achar Shavir Me'al Ha'esh Mevashel. Even though they've removed it from the fire, has the koach to cook, as long as long as it's got that heat. Therefore, you can't put spices in it. That's the kli rishon, right? That you haven't ladled the food out onto a plate yet. Or in the Shulchan Aruch, the ability of the kli rishon to cook clearly depends upon it remaining at the temperature of Yad Soletis. Thus, if it cools below Yad Soletis, it's incapable of cooking, as pointed out by the Mishnah Berurah. So Kli Rishon only has the koach to be mavashal if it's at that certain temperature. If it's below the temperature, then it's not a problem. Rav Simcha Bunim Cohen, author of the Shabbos Kitchen, offers a few examples of placing uncooked food into a Kli Rishon, such as adding seasoning or cold water to a pot of hot soup. If a Kli Rishon contains hot food or liquids, let's use what we normally have. Friday night, our wives have cooked hot soup. And of course, the pot is not on the fire anymore. You've removed it from the fire. But it might be on a what do you call that? Not a grill. I don't know. A trivet? That's a
Yeah, keep the heat from hitting the table.
no, not a trivet. Next thing you move it to one of your burners, but it's not on.
Oh, what's the difference?
It's not on it. A Kli Rishon remains a Kli Rishon, no matter where you put it. Let's say you put it on a burner that's not on, okay? But the food is hot, okay? So it's a Kli Rishon. We have hot soup. So if a Kli Rishon contains hot food or liquids, it's forbidden to immerse in it any uncooked item. For example, one may not add seasoning to a pot of hot soup, even after the pot has been removed from the blech, because the heat of the soup will cook the seasoning. Cold water may not be added to a pot of hot water or soup, since the cold water will become heated by the hot water of the Kli Rishon. Similarly, cooked liquids, which have been cooled, may not be added to a Kli Rishon, since it's forbidden to reheat liquids that have cooled completely, as we learned above. Remember last week, you can't take something out of the refrigerator, right? And put it into onto the blech. It's reheating it. You can't start from cold. So that would also
liquid. Can't do that for a liquid.
For a liquid. We talked about a dover gush, like a piece of kugel or a piece of meat that doesn't have gravy, that can be put, but not a liquid, even it was previously cooked. Now, weiter. Bishul and a kli sheni and a kli shlishi. In contrast to the prohibition of cooking in a kli rishon, the Mishnah quoted above in source 1 states that it is permitted to add spices to a kli sheni. The Gemara elsewhere, though, in the Masechta Shabbos states plainly that a kli sheni does not cook, and the implication is that this is a universal property of the kli sheni. What is the rationale for this distinction? We saw above in source 3 that according to the Ramban and the Yerushalmi, there is no inherent difference between a kli rishon and a kli sheni, and even cooking using a kli rishon is forbidden only midrabanan. It seems that the Ramban would be forced to explain, but when the Gemara states that a kli sheni does not cook, this means that even according to the rabbinic stringency, which treats a kli rishon as if it cooks, there is no such stringency for a kli sheni. Tosfos and other Rishonim do not accept that, and assume that a kli rishon is subject to Bishul on a Torah level. Presumably, they understand that the Yerushalmi is not consistent with the Bavli and is therefore not accepted as halacha. Back to the text. Tosfos offers a different explanation, that because the kli rishon was on the fire, its walls have become very hot, and this allows it to continue to cook on a biblical level. But with respect to a kli sheni, like we said before, even if the food inside the bowl is currently at the temperature of Yad Soletis, but it loses its heat much more rapidly, like we said, because we took the bowl out of out of your cabinet where it's cold, so it doesn't add heat.
So the theory is also, with what the intent was, the intent for a Rishon and the intent for a Sheni.
It's not based on intent.
Not usually based on intent. If you take a look, you're saying that, it can be the same temperature when you take it off.
But we say like this,
Sheni you can
It-
get to.
if the pot was on the fire,
Yeah.
so the walls of the pot
Mhm.
have a lot of heat.
Yeah.
And once you transfer, and now you've taken it off the fire, so it's not on the fire. But Chazal understood that this kli has the ability to cook something because there still may be heat in the walls of this. Now, but now you've transferred the food to a new kli. That's a kli sheni. It has nothing to do with intent. Now that kli doesn't have the ability to cook because it doesn't have added heat into its walls. It's going to get its heat from the food that's put in there, and it's going to rapidly dissipate. It's not related to intent. Shmamina, kli sheni enim mevashel. That's what the Gemara says. But Tema, says Tosfos, he doesn't understand. Maishna kli sheni mekli rishon. If the temperature is the same, the iyad solet is afil kli sheni nami. That means, let's say the temperature when you transferred the food was 120 degrees. And the moment you put it into kli sheni, it's still 120 degrees. So then Tosfos doesn't understand. If you put spices, it's going to cook the spices. Yes, the temperature is going to drop, but not right now. That's what Tosfos doesn't understand. Why inherently should a kli rishon and a kli sheni be treated differently just because, yeah, we explained according to one sheet because it wasn't on the fire. But the temperature is the same. Now, v'i ein yad soletis bo. If you're going to hang your hat on yad soletis bo, then a kli rishon is also going to drop under yad soletis bo. Why should there be a problem adding something into a kli rishon? We see there is, right? So you can't have it both ways. Yesh lomar. So Tosfos answers, Lefisha kli rishon mitoch she'omer ala or, because it was on the fire, dof nosav chamim, its walls are hot. Umachzik chomo zman meruba, and therefore it keeps its heat long. Ulakach natnu bo shir, because zman shayat soletis bo osir. So then they said, as long as it's 114 and above, it can cook. If it's less, no problem. Ama kli sheni, afagav the yad soletis bo. The kli sheni is inherently a different beast. And even if the temperature is yad soletis bo, it's permitted. Because ein dof nosav chamim v'holechu miskarer. It cannot cook the spice. He's saying even right now it's yad soletis bo, because since the walls of that kli are cold, it's going to keep on going lower and doesn't have the ability to cook something. That's Tosfos. Commentaries disagree as to the meaning of the distinction explicated by Tosfos. According to some, a kli sheni does not cook on a scientific level due to the considerations mentioned. But in cases where food clearly does get cooked in a kli sheni, even aside from the category known as kalei bishul, which things that are easy to cook, one would be prohibited from cooking in such a manner. But others understand that Chazal established a rule that a kli sheni is not subject to bishul in any situation due to the reason given. One Chazal established this guideline, then it applies in all cases. Even if food in a kli sheni clearly does become cooked in certain cases, other than kalei bishul, which Chazal themselves acknowledge as a special category. Okay, so you can see the Rashba, the Beis Yosef, the Chavos Das, they all go to town on this Tosfos. As we shall see, the poskim in general assume that the halacha follows the understanding of Tosfos, so that there is an inherent difference between a kli rishon and a kli sheni, and a kli sheni cannot cook. Nevertheless, there are several instances in which even a kli sheni may be capable of cooking, and we'll see what those are. By the way, for those of you who want further iyun, look in page 67. You know, in the back of every chapter, there's always a little bit more iyun. They'll go into a little bit more detail to go see what does the Beis Yosef say, all the various Rishonim that were quoted who discussed Tosfos. Now, davar gush. Davar gush is something that's not a liquid, like a piece of kugel, piece of meat, right? A potential exception to the basic principles of Kli Rishon and Kli Sheni in the context of the halachas of kashrus may also inform the halachas of Shabbos. The Isser Ve'eter Ha'aruch writes that hot solid food, often known as a davar gush, retains the status of a Kli Rishon even when transferred out of a Kli Rishon, as it does not take the shape of the vessel and is not affected by the cold walls. Think about it. You take some hot soup, you put it in a bowl, so all of that liquid touches all of the walls of that bowl and starts cooling down. But let's say you took a hot piece of kugel from the pot, from the Kli Rishon on the fire, and you put it in a bowl. Well, the kugel sits in the middle. It doesn't touch the walls. It has its own shape. So they explain that it doesn't, it itself, if you put something on that kugel, could cook it. Or if you add spices to it, it would have the status of a Kli Rishon. Therefore, if such a piece of piping hot food is cut with a non-kosher knife, it absorbs non-kosher taste. We've learned when we went through Yordeya that a blia, right, a treif, if a knife was used to cut a treif piece of meat, so that knife absorbs that blia. The blia is the taste that absorbed in now. And even though those of you who remember Yordeya, if you go beyond 24 hours, it's noisin tam livgam. The blia, the taste in a vessel after 24 hours is a bad taste. And therefore, it won't transfer. It won't be a problem. A knife is the duchka de sakin. If you cut something with it, it will revive. It's machala lishvach. It revives that blia. So that's why we're very careful with fleshik knives, milchnik knives, and parv knives, because other dishes is different. Because if it's beyond 24 hours, there's leniency. But when it comes to a knife, the blia may transfer to something. But again, the blia only transfers when it's hot. It doesn't transfer when it's cold. You take a cold piece of ham and you put it on a kosher plate. You mediach it. You rinse it and wash it off. There's no transfer if both are cold. It's only if there's heat, and it depends if it's above or below whether the blia will absorb or not. Now this issue comes in to Hilchos Shabbos. He says, basar roteach, a piece of brisket, shayad soletis bo, that's 114 or above, shenechtach besakin shel chalav, and you had a knife that had been used to absorb milk taste. Shehu ben yomo, it's within the 24 hours. Mitashmish rotech, within 24 hours of being used for hot milk. Obesakin shel shar isurim, or a knife with other isurim. He's referring to trephis, agav duchket sakina, because of this the sharp knife, boleb mekula, it absorbs. The lo dami lekli sheni, bedover yavesh. It's not the same thing if you put liquid into a kli sheni. But if you put a piece of kugel in a kli sheni, leka defanos hamakaros, it doesn't come into contact with the walls of that soup bowl. It sits in the middle. That hot piece of meat will be able to cook something if you pour something on it, like spices. The Marshal writes the same principle as the Isser V'Heter, and he extends it even to granular foods like rice, right? Not like a davar gush, like a piece of meat or maybe a kugel, but even rice is separate little pieces. Says the Yam Shel Shlomo, the lo shaykh kli sheni ela b'mayim v'rodim. This heter, where Walter asked about salting and peppering in a soup, but that if you poured it in a kli sheni, it's not a problem. That only works with liquid. The kol davar ad solo, something that fluid It mixes and cools down quickly. It cools down. Not of a piece of meat or fish. Anything solid. As long as it's the right temperature, 114, it will cook. Maflit umavliya shaper. It will give off, let's say, something that is isser embedded in it, because it had, let's say, trephis in it, treif oil or something like that. It could give it off to something else, or it can absorb. That's the concept of mavliya, absorbing from something. You put something treif piece of meat next to that hot kugel, it will absorb the treifness. Nira, the doichen v'oire is gamkein. He says rice, the same thing. So you had rice in a kli rishon, and now you put it in a soup bowl, a kli sheni. Kozman shayat solezbo v'chamim hein kekli rishon. So that's a stringency of the Yam Shel Shlomo. That rice in a kli sheni will still have the ability to cook. He would not be able to spice those things. The Ramah disagrees with the Marshal, countering that on the contrary, liquids retain heat for longer than solids do. Certainly then solid food in a kli sheni cannot cause absorption of taste any more than liquids in a kli sheni do. Says the Darkei Moshe, Valim Kvar Munach, the kli sheni cham. If hot food was placed in kli sheni, Aval Bishayat Soledes Boina Mavliya. Since it's in the status of a kli sheni, it doesn't have the ability to absorb treifness. Shar kli sheni. Odover av kagon chatichas basar shenichol b'kli sheni, or a thick piece of meat that was put into a kli sheni. The logar dover shehu gush midaver lach. The Ramah, in contradistinction to the Marshal, says that there is no stringency by a solid food. Just like a liquid will cool down and it can't cook it, so too the dover gush can't. Rashba, gam shenir leinaim sharotev rutachas yoter shomeres cholim midover av. He says a boiling liquid preserves its heat more than a thick item. Udlokomoshra lamar rash luria, to the Marshal. He disagrees with him. Shechilik Bachi. Vein Dvarv Nirin. He disagrees with the Marshal. Listen, they disagreed about a lot of things. In my area, in Tzurba, the Ramah held with the normative opinion that if one testicle was removed, you were a Tzurba. Comes the Marshal, and he said it's totally the Chachmas HaRoifim. If the Roifim say that he could be moilid, if he can have children, he can be to have children. And this Marshal is the most important Marshal I think we have in halacha, because somebody, God forbid, needed their testicle removed for testicular cancer or something like that. They're not a psuadaka because of the Marshal. So they both lived in the same region. Those of you who go to Lublin, you can go to the kever of the Marshal, the Yam Shel Shlomo, where the Chazal of Lublin is buried. The Marshal is an extremely important posek in Ashkenazi Psak. So you see the Farish that they argued. I actually thought that the Yam Shel Shlomo, remember, the Ramah lived in Krakow, you're talking about 1580, 1620, something like that, mid 1500s, late 1500s. I was thought the Marshal was a little after the Ramah. Looks like they were contemporaries, because the Ramah is responding directly to the Marshal. So they were really more contemporaries. I always thought the Marshal was a little bit after. Okay, so up until now we've been dealing with kashrus. Will a davar gush placed in a kli sheni act like a liquid or not? And we saw opinions that it still had the ability to transfer taste. So what about cooking on Shabbos, right? What is the halacha davar gush with respect to Shabbos? The Mogen Avram takes the stringent position of the Marshal, and applies the same principle to Bishul on Shabbos. Accordingly, he rules that even in a klisheni, hot solid food is capable of cooking other food that comes in contact with it. You would not be allowed to add spices to a hot piece of food based on this Mogen Avram. Even it's in a klisheni. It's on your dish, your Shabbos table, because our plates are klishenis. But according to this, Mogen Avram would be a stringency. Others, such as Tosefes Shabbos, share the view of Mogen Avram, of a davar gush. The Katzva Poiskim B'Yoredeya, the davar shu gush afilu b'klisheni mavashav v'kosher kein sli, and certainly roasted foods. However, the Chavis Das argues that the rules of absorbing taste and kashrus doesn't correspond to the parameters of Bishul and Shabbos. Remember, in Yoredeya, we need heat to transfer the blios. But what the Chavis Das is not going to try to show us is there's a distinction between, just because something has enough heat to transfer the bli, it's not the same as Bishul on Shabbos. That's what he's going to try to do. He reasons that even according to Marshall, solid flu in a klisheni is only capable of discharging absorption of taste, but not of cooking other food. If there was an unkosher blia in that piece of kugel, it can transfer it with the heat, but it cannot cook. One has nothing to do with the other. Therefore, when hot solid foods are removed from the heat source or from the kli rishon and placed in a klisheni, they cannot cook. They cannot cook only when they're resting within the hot walls of a kli rishon. If that rice or the kugel or whatever you're dealing with is in the pan that was on the fire, that's the kli rishon, then they have a problem. Once they've been moved to a klisheni, even though it's a davar gush, it doesn't have a problem. Very important distinction here. Says the Chavis Das, nearer delinian bishul, deni yochel avashel. The only thing that has the power to cook rak kli rishon, sheyeshel defan some chamimos, because they have hot walls. They have hot walls because they were sitting on the fire, and we know through physics that the heat of the metal, the electrons everywhere in that metal is moving around. That's what creates heat. Klisheni doesn't have that. Other hot foods, even they might have had a din of a kli rishon according to Marshall, is enam avashel. They don't have the power to violate Bishul on Shabbos. The avshein lo defanus amakaros, ein lo defanus amachamemos. They make that piece of kugel is not in contact with walls that are cooling it, but they're also not in contact with walls that are heating it. So it cannot add heat to something else to the point that it's going to be mavashel. What is the practical halacha concerning a davar gush? The Mishnah Brura writes that one should take into account the stringent view of the Mogen Avram and refrain from adding uncooked spices to hot solid food, even in a klisheni. Of course, the Mishnah Brura we know is a Rosh Hashiva. I think Yaakov Yellen once told me, right? A lot of the people used to, the Aruch HaShulchan was not a Rosh Hashiva. Either he was a Rav or he was a businessman or something like that. And the Mishnah Brura was a Rosh Hashiva. So in many cases, the Mishnah Brura was more mach.
Yes, and in fact, the Aruch HaShulchan, the Ramosha was he preferred the Aruch HaShulchan. The Aruch HaShulchan was actually after the first volumes of the Mishnah Brura, which were in the 1880s. So the Aruch HaShulchan was also later, and he was a shul rav. On the other hand, the Mishnah Brura was a Rosh Yeshiva.
But did you hear Rav Moshe say that? Did he?
I heard Rav Moshe say that he preferred the Aruch HaShulchan.
But he didn't say because one was a Rosh Hashiva.
No, he didn't. That I never heard him say, although that has been said in other places. But to be clear, I did hear Rav Moshe say that he preferred, that he followed the Aruch HaShulchan in where they disagreed.
Those of you, David Tumim, I don't know whether David is Walter on. Did David Tumim learn in Tiferet Yerushalayim with Rav Moshe?
I don't know.
I don't know.
David Tumim was an engineer who davened in our shul. he didn't go anywhere without the Aruch HaShulchan. He was an Aruch HaShulchan Yid. And I don't know if he got that from Rav Moshe. I don't know. I have to call. I'm in contact with him. I'll ask him. Okay. So the Mishnah Berurah takes the more machmir approach, like the Mogen Avram, who said you have to be, we're concerned about the Marshal, that even a Dover Gush could cook in a klisheni. But there's many other contemporary Ashkenazi poskim. The Shmira Shabbos Kilchasa, right? Rav Neuwirth, who pretty much followed Rav Shlomo Zalman. The Meora Shabbos, the Pnei Halacha, Rav Eliezer Melamed, also rules similarly that you got to be careful about a Dover Gush and a klisheni. But Rav Ovadia Yosef rules that one may be lenient, as even if the halacha follows the Marshal regarding kashrus, one need not adopt the strict interpretation of the Mogen Avram applying to this as Bishul as well. So, I guess the Sfardim, and then we'll see the Rav Moshe will weigh in on this. However, let's see what Rav Ovadia says. So again, a posik is going to use this concept. If there's multiple sveikas, you can be lenient. Now, what's the double sveika? Shema halacha k'haramo, shesoy v'she'ein evdel bein lach l'gush. Remember, we saw the Darkei Moshe disagreed with the Marshal about a davar gush and a klisheni. So number one, maybe the halacha is like the Ramah. Shebishneim klisheni ein mavashem. V'imtim salom halacha karashal, says Rav Ovadia, that if you're going to go the stringent way, that the halacha is like the Marshal, that a davar gush can cook, shema chalek bin lach legush, but shema af hulo amar elin lavli ulaflit. Remember, we don't have any documentation from the Marshal that he translated his concept to Bishul on Shabbos. He talked about it in Yoredeya with transfer of taste. Is something kosher? Does it absorb the taste or not? So maybe he didn't think that it had to do with Shabbos. Kamosha Kazav Minchas Yaakov is Siyaso. One of the Achronim, the Minchas Yaakov, learned that approach in the Marshal. So therefore, based on that Sveika, double suffix, maybe the halacha is like the Ramah, maybe the Marshal didn't learn it on Bishul, but only learned it on Mavli and Maflid. Chilean Shabbos ain't chiluk bein marak v'roitev b'klisheni. There's no difference with hot soup and a klisheni shayat solesbo. Lebein gush b'klisheni shucham shayat solesbo. Shebekol ofen naktinan shein klisheni mavashel. We're left with Tosfos, with the basic concept that a klisheni can't cook no matter what the temperature is. Afilo ayat soledesbo. Rav David Ribbiat offers some practical examples of placing uncooked foods on top of a davar gush while adopting the stringent position of the Mishnah Berurah. The Minag, Rav Ribbiat, I guess he's the author of the 39 Malachas Sefer. The Minag is to be machmer and to treat a davar gush with all of the restrictions of a Kli Rishon for most practical purposes. Therefore, one may not sprinkle diced onion, garlic, celery, or any previously uncooked spices and seasonings. Spices are usually not considered halachically cooked unless one knows otherwise. Directly onto a hot davar gush, just as one may not put these items into Kli Rishon. Rav Moshe Feinstein writes that even if we are to be stringent and treat solid foods as capable of cooking in a klisheni, the stringency need not be applied in conjunction with the stringency that cooked liquid food is subject to bishul again after it has cooled. That means he's talking about something that had previously been cooked. As such, one may put ketchup, if it is classified as a liquid, on hot food in a klisheni, since ketchup is previously cooked during its production. The subject of Bishul Achar Bishul we discussed in detail in the last year. It was noted there that according to Rav Moshe, Bishul Achar Bishul prohibits the reheating of cold liquids as a rabbinic stringency. But the strict halacha follows those Rishonim that permit reheating cold liquids in a manner that does not violate the other restrictions of Chazor, which we'll learn in Shir form. Rav Moshe explained that for this reason, it is permitted to reheat liquids that have not entirely cooled, since the stringency was not extended to that case. However, we noted in that shir that some achronim understood differently, that Bishul achar Bishul is forbidden on a Torah level. And they may disagree as well with Rav Moshe's leniency discussed here concerning pouring ketchup into a hot kli sheni. Rav Moshe apparently assumes that ketchup is classified as a liquid and limits his leniency to placing it on a solid food in a kli sheni. Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach in Shmir Shabbos, on the other hand, maintains that ketchup is considered a solid. So Rav Shlomo Zalman would therefore be more lenient than Rav Moshe and permit even placing ketchup or tomato paste onto a hot plate or heat source, as long as you follow the rules of Chazar described in Shir 4. But Rav Neuwirth maintains that Rav Shlomo Zalman would not be lenient to allow cold liquid, such as soup, to be placed on a davar gush. And I guess Rav Yosef Tzvi has something. Let's learn the Rav Moshe. Near Ladina, the Rishonim litin ketchup al basar roseach, shenitin l'kli sheni. You can pour ketchup on a hot piece of meat that was put into a kli sheni. The afim nachmir gam shtei chumras, that if we're going to be accept the two stringencies, hu b'shtei chumras shehu safik mamish, kol chumras she'af hu safik sfek tzveika. So even though it's a sfek tzveika, like the Rav Ovadia Yosef said, ulai yesh la'achmir b'Shabbos mishum chumraso. But maybe we shouldn't follow the lenient way. We should be machmir. Aval hacha chumra diyesh bishul achar bishul b'davar lach hu chumra ba'alma. Shegdolei haposkim savri gam b'lachin bishul achar bishul. Here we also have, since he's treating ketchup as a liquid, we don't have to add that chumra as well. That poskim argue whether something that's been cooked already can be cooked. The Noagin came. The Rakshim Mitzdan Lagamri Machmir. We learned last week that it's only if it cooled completely that we're Machmir. The Gama Chumer Bedover Gush Afro Klisheni Wadain Kroseh. This Chumer of the Rashal, that a Dover Gush, a solid piece, can still cook even if it's put in a Klisheni. Hapliki Arbe Alzeh. Uvasocham Ramah. He says many argue including Ramah. Asher Iker Godel Boy Ra. He says that he's the main hoyrog gadol, vatasham. You're the machmir rak mitzad duchket the sakina shelo shaykh kan banachas haketchup. Right over there, by where the marshal is dealing with the transfer of the blias, the knife, because you have the concept of duch, the sharpness of the knife. But here, plus in ketchup, there is no duchket the sakina. Vachsam soifer huva bepischet shuva mekel karamo behefsid meruba. He brings a chasam soifer that says if it's a financial loss, he paskins like the Ramah that the Dover Gush doesn't cook. V'chein kosov shoharagan came Moragon Rav Nosson Adler, who came from Frankfurt, who was some Soifer's Rebbe. Lahakal b'Dover Gush beis hatzorach from King Gamdinzeh. So the beautiful Rav Moshe. Let's go to the point from to Iri Klirisha, and we'll finish with that. Regarding the definition of a Dover Gush, we already saw above in source 10 that according to the Marshal, rice is included. Recent poskim such as Rav Nissim Karelitz clarified that this applies only to many grains of rice that are clumped together, not to a single grain or many individual grains. They don't retain heat, like I guess a clump of rice. Gush shedinika kli rishon lav dafka chatichas basar. It's not only a piece of meat. Alafilo oris v'doichet. Even rice. Havi gush kol zman shayat soles. Who adin kidneys, legumes, itriot, noodles, the koshken kugel or pashtida, pie. He says it only applies if the rice is stuck together. They hold the but many pieces of rice separately, or then it's a cliche, it's not a problem. Rav Karetz implies that rice not clumped together would not qualify as a davar gush, even large quantity. But the Orcha Shabbos, who simply lists rice as davar gush without further specification. Okay. Anyways, I think it was a very enlightening. This klisheni, we're not through. We'll be dealing with klisheni, klishlishi extensively maybe over the next 2 weeks. Questions, comments, ha'aros? There was somebody else here. Was that Bernie?
Not sure, Bernie. I don't.
Everybody, so next week, see everybody next week. Have a good Shabbos,
Yeah.
everybody.
Sure.